Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. Welcome back to a new tutorial. In this video today guys, I'll be showing you how to make a shirt pattern, a female shirt pattern. If you want to learn how to do this, watch this video to the end. And if you're new to my channel, thank you very much for stopping by. If you're an OG, thank you for your support. Thank you for your like, your comments. I do appreciate all of it. Thank you very, very much. Now moving over to this video, I'm going to be using this shirt pattern to make a dress later on in another video. So if you want to see all of these goodies that I'm bringing your way, watch this video to the end, and also do subscribe to this channel if you haven't subscribed already. And I recommend that you recommend this channel to your friends, and also put on your notification bell so that you don't miss out anytime I pop out with a new video. All right guys, so without wasting much of our time and without talking too much, let's jump straight into the video. First off, you'll be needing this set of tools for your measurements for your pattern, and you also be needing your measurements for this shirt pattern. So on the list I have there are the measurements you'll be needing. You need your shirt pattern, your waist, your hip, your shoulder, your neck width, and your neck depth. So these are basically all of the measurements you'll be needing to draft a shirt pattern. Now I have the following tools for this tutorial. I have my pattern paper, I have a pattern master, I have my tape rule, I have my scissors, my marker, my tracing wheel, and every other thing in between. Okay, so guys, these are all the things you'll be needing to make this pattern drafting run smoothly. So first off, I'm going to start off with the front pattern before moving over to the back pattern. So basically, after drafting the front, all I need to do is to trace off the front at the back, and there we have it. So let's begin with the front pattern of our shirt. Now the front pattern is just like your basic bodice pattern. If you've not seen a video on how I drafted the basic bodice pattern, the link is down there in the description box. I recommend that you go and watch it as a beginner. Go watch that video and learn how to draft a basic bodice pattern, because that is where all of these patterns that we work on it's being developed from. Okay, so I have my pattern here, and on my pattern paper I'm going to draw a straight line at the top of the pattern to indicate the starting point. All right, so I'll just indicate the starting point for my pattern paper. You can decide to take 1 inch as your starting point, whatever, it's just a starting point. Okay, you've gotten your starting point. Now next you're going to take 3 inches inward, and that 3-inch inward from the edge of the paper will serve as the space where you'll be placing your button line, your interfacing line, and the facing line for the button extension. So I'm going to place 3 inches away from the edge of the paper, and all of our measurements will come right after the line that I just drew. So you can see the straight line I drew on the paper. That is where we'll be taking all of our measurements from. The extra at the other side is going to be for the buttonhole, the button extension, and all of the overlaps. Okay, so but before we get into that, we're going to start taking our measurements. So on the shoulder line, I'll take my shoulder measurement. I'll be adding 1 inch to it, and that will be 14 inches plus 1, that will be 15. So I'll be adding 0.5 inch to it, and that will be 7.5 inch. So on my shoulder line I'll place 7.5 inch. Now from the shoulder line, after placing 7.5 inch on that line, I'll come down by 1 inch for the shoulder slope. From that 1 inch on the shoulder slope, I'll take my armhole line, which is 7.5. So from that 7.5, I'll mark a straight line to connect to the shoulder slope that we created, and then out up till the other side of the paper to create the chest line. So now the chest line has been formed, the armhole line has been formed. Next we're going to place our straight vertical horizontal lines on the pattern for the bust line, the waistline, and the chest line. So for you to do that, you need to place your tape from your shoulder line and mark your bust measurement. That's your bust line, your waistline, and your hip line. So for my bust line, I have 9.5 inch. And for the waistline, like I said, you take your tape, place it on the shoulder line, and you get your bust line. My bust line is 9.5, and then my waistline is 16 inches, and my hip line, that is going to be the length of the shirt, which is 24 inch. So I've placed all of those measurements now, and I'm going to connect them together like so with a horizontal line. So after connecting all of the lines together, next I will just go ahead and indicate what each of these lines are, so that people that are watching us for the first time might not get confused on what these lines are. So the first line, like I mentioned, is my bust line. The second line is the waistline, and the third line is my hip line. So guys, now we move to the neckline. We take 3 inches. I'll take 3 inches for the neck depth, and 3 inches as well for the neck width. So for my neck depth and for my neck width, I'll take 3 inches, and I'm going to just create a mini box for where the neck line will be sitting on. So after creating this, I'll move to the shoulder slope to connect that slant that will show us that the shoulder is actually slanted and not straight. So I'll connect from my neckline to where the 1 inch stop at the shoulder slope. So after that, I'll take my French curve to curve out the neck shape that I want for my shirt. Now after we've cut out the neck shape for this neck, we're going to move to the armhole. We're going to be creating the armhole for the front. Now to create the armhole for the front, you take your tape and you place it on your armhole line to get the midpoint of the armhole. But before then, I'll be placing quarter of my bust measurement on my chest line. So that line that is just like a little box outside of the close to the armhole is the chest line. Okay, sorry I didn't extend the line to the other side, but that's the chest line. So I'll take quarter of my bust measurements on that line, I'll place it there, and then I'll also add 0.5 inch for ease, so that will be 9.5. So on my armhole line, I'll go over to the armhole line and divide what I have there by 2, get the midpoint, and at the midpoint you come inward by 0.5. So you come inward by 0.5. After you've placed the midpoint of your line, come in by 0.5, and then you take your French curve and then you connect from the top of your armhole to the 0.5 inch we took inward up until the point where we marked on the chest line. Alright, so that's what we've done here. Now we've gotten the armhole curve for the front pattern. So next we're going to move forward. The next thing to do is to get the waistline. So this shirt pattern is going to have a dart on it, but if you don't want to have a dart on your shirt, you can just run a straight line from your chest line down to your hip line. But for this for the kind of shirt I want to make, I'll be adding a waist dart to it. So on my waistline, instead of just running a straight line from the chest line down to the hip line, on my waistline I'll take quarter of my waist measurement, which is 7.5, and I'm going to be adding 1 inch dart to it. That will be 8.5. So I'll place that on my waistline, and then I'll move down to the hip line. I'll place quarter of my hip measurement. Quarter of my hip measurement is 9.75, so I'll place 9.7. I'm not going to be adding any allowances to it. I'll only add an allowance at the bust, at the chest line, sorry. So on my hip line, I marked 9.75, which is quarter of my hip measurement. And the next thing we're going to do is to connect these 3 points together from the chest line down to the waist and down to the hip line. So I would use my pattern master to connect from the chest line down to the waistline, and then use my French curve or my hip curve to connect from the waist to the hip. Okay, now we've formed the curve from the waist to the hip and also to the bust line. Next, what we do at the hip line, we are going to go up by 2 inches. Now we're going to create an S shape connecting to the hip line. You know that S shape you see on a shirt. I'm sure you've seen this before. Okay, if you've not seen it before, go up by 2 inches on your hip line, and I'm going to use a pencil to just draw out this S shape that indicates is actually a shirt and not your basic blouse or your basic gown. Okay, so you just go up by 2 inches on your hip line and then draw an S shape like that. I'll just use my marker to highlight the shape again, and that will be it for this. Next, what we're going to do is to go over to the button extension now. So before we go to the button extension, we still have one thing to do, which is the darts. Now for the waist darts, you need to get your bust span. So you divide your nipple to nipple into two. So you measure from one nipple to the other, and then you place that on your hip line, your waistline, and then your bust line. So my nipple to nipple is 4 inches. I'll place that 4 inch on the hip, waist, and bust line. So to create the dart now, you need to draw a straight line to connect these 3 points together. But the thing with the dart is that you need to come down by 1 inch from your bust line, just so that the dart is not pointed towards your bust when you take it in on your shirt. So on the bust line, I'll come down by 1 inch, and on the hip line, I'll go up by 2 inches. So that is where the dart is going to stop and it's going to start. So I'm going to just draw a straight line to connect these 3 points together. And at the waistline, I'm going to be opening up the dart by 1 inch, so half an inch on both sides of the darts that I've just created. So I'm just going to draw in the darts. Now after drawing in the darts, we're going to move to the front so that we can create the button extension, the overlap for the button extensions, and also the interfacing and facing for the button. So for my button extension, I'm going to take 0.75 inch for the button extension. You can go 1 inch, but maximum is 1 inch, and the minimum you can do is 0.5 or 0.75. So I think you should go with 0.75 for the sake of this video. I'll be going with 0.75 for the button line. So I'm going to draw from the main line. I'm going to mark from the main line to where 0.75 is, and I'm going to draw a straight line and also indicate that as the button line. So now after we've drawn out the button line, next we're going to draw the facing. And to get the facing, you're going to take 1 inch after drawing the button line, you're going to take 1 inch from that button line to create the facing line. So we are taking 1 inch from top to bottom for the facing line, and from that facing line again, you're going to take another 1 inch to create the interfacing line. So now we've created all of these lines. I'll just indicate what each of them are so that we don't get confused. So the first line is the button line, which is for the button extension, where the button will actually sit. Second line is the facing, for the facing, and the third line is for the interfacing. So the facing and the interfacing are all 1 inch each, but for the button line I have 0.75 inch. So now that we've gotten all of this, next we're going to go over to add our seam allowances all around. At the hip line, that is at the bottom of the shirt, I'll be taking 1 inch for the seam allowance. At the side, the neckline, the shoulder line, and the armhole line, I'll be taking half an inch all around as a seam allowance. So now we do that, and then after that I'm going to be cutting out this pattern. So but before I cut out this pattern, you notice that we've not extended the neckline to the overlap, that is the button overlap that we have. So we need to extend that extension before cutting out the pattern. I've also gone ahead to label all of the parts that I need to add all of my annotations. You can see I've labeled the bust line, the waistline, the hip line. I also over labeled the dart line, which is 1 inch. So on the neckline, I'm going to extend the neckline to the overlap that we did. So but before then, I'm going to cut out the excesses. I'm just cutting out the excess that we don't need after creating all of the lines for the button extension. So after cutting out all of these lines, So what you need to do is to fold in your interfacing and the facing line inward to meet the button line, so that way we can extend the neckline so that it will be equal when you cut it out on your pattern or on your fabric. So that's all we'll do. You can see the way I'm gradually folding it in. First I'll fold in the interfacing line, and fold in the facing line, and we get to the button line, and I'm going to use my tracing wheel to trace off the neckline so that we have equal and even neckline. So after that, I'm going to open it up and use my marker to just draw out that line that we traced off on the paper. After drawing out that line, next we're going to add all of the seam allowances that we need for this pattern. So now you can see I've added my seam allowance. Next I'm going to take another pattern paper, and then I'll trace off all of this pattern on the pattern paper without the without the neckline, sorry. So because the neckline for the back is just going to be 1 inch, so I'll trace off all of this with the seam allowance but without the neckline for the front. Yeah, I'll just do the neckline for the back. So for the back neck depth, I'll take 1 inch for the neck depth. So you need to place your tape from the point where our shoulder line stops, and you mark 1 inch downward. So now I'll place my tape on that point, and I mark 1 inch downward from that line. Next up, what I'll do is to connect the point from the shoulder to the 1 inch and out to the other side, to the center back of the back piece. So that's what I'll do here. Create a mini box where the neckline for the back will be sitting. So after creating that, I'll just take my French curve to create that curve for the neckline for the back, and next we'll just add 1/2 inch seam allowance to it, and that's all for the back. So for the back dart, I didn't come down by 1 inch from the bust line, so you just don't need to come down by 1 inch for the bust line for your dart. So after that, I've added all of my annotations. The back is cut on fold, this front is cut into 2. I also added my annotations just so you know when you draft this pattern you already have directions on what to do. So I have all of my annotations written down on each of the different pieces, and now I will just go ahead and cut out my front and my back pattern. So after I have cut out the back pattern, next what we are going to do is to do a little adjustment to the neckline of the front. Now you notice on shirt patterns that overlap that looks like the shoulder line is a little bit forward in front of the shirt line of the front pattern. So that's what we are going to do. The adjustment we'll be doing is just to take 1 inch away from the front shirt pattern. So what I'll do, note that the shirt pattern already has seam allowances all around at the shoulder line and everywhere. So we're going to be taking out 1 inch from our seam allowance. So there's no point taking away the seam allowance when we've already added it. So we'll take the 1 inch we are removing from the front from our seam allowance. So take your tape, measure from the top of the seam allowance and measure 1 inch from there, and then you use your ruler to mark a line, a slanted line as in the shape of the shoulder line, and then just mark it down. After you've marked it down, next what you're going to do is to take your scissors and cut out that part. Okay, so we cut out 1 inch from the front shirt pattern, including the seam allowance. I hope you remember that. So now if you have cut out this 1 inch, we're going to re-add the 1/2 inch seam allowance, so that when you cut this fabric, when you cut the pattern on your fabric, you have extra room to join the front and the back. So we'll add the 1/2 inch back after cutting it out from the front pattern. So the 1 inch that we cut out from the front, we're going to place it at the back. So what you do is to take that 1 inch we cut out from the front and place it on the seam allowance line of the back shoulder line. Okay, so you can see what I'm doing in this video. I took the 1 inch I cut out from the back, from the front pattern of our shirt block, and I placed it on our half an inch seam allowance on the shirt line, and I'm going to use some tapes to hold it down. So the effect this is going to have on the shirt is it's going to form an overlap in front of the shirt. I'm sure if you've seen a shirt pattern, a shirt, if you own a shirt, look at the shoulder, you discover that the shoulder line is not necessarily sitting at the shoulder. It's like 1 inch or 2 inch in front, towards the front pattern of the shirt pattern. Okay, so that's what we've done now, and basically after doing this, we are done with this pattern and we are good to go. Now I'm going to do a video on how to sew. I'm going to use this pattern to make a shirt dress. So if you want to learn how to do that, if you want to see that video, I recommend you stick to this channel, subscribe to this channel and watch the video to the end. And also check out in the description box, I have a tutorial, a video on how to cut and sew a shirt, a shirt sleeve. So also you can also check that out as well. Alright guys, if you liked this video, please give me a huge thumbs up and please watch to the end. Okay, thank you for watching to the end. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for liking and sharing. If you have any thoughts, you can leave your thoughts in the comments down below. Alright guys, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you in my next video. Remain positive wherever you are and keep loving. Bye.